Hello, everyone. Welcome to our session 2 of Introduction to Character Design. The form is the function. This 3-part session forms part of the peer-to-peer series with New Bedford Creative. My name is Marianella Perry. I am the Senior ARPA Fellow at New Bedford Creative. Thank you for joining us today. So I would like to introduce our guest speaker, Roger Andrews, who will present to us about character design, but more specifically about the form and the structure within the character. So I will pass it over to him to give more details of who he is and what he will present for us today.
Well, thank you, Margot and Marianella. Thank you guys for inviting me to share my little corner of the art world with everyone. As mentioned, my name is Roger. I'm actually born and raised in New Bedford, Massachusetts. I actually live in Westport, Mass. So don't hold that against me. I got out of the New Bedford orbit for a little while, but I'm originally from New Bedford, and I graduated from New Bedford Folk Tech many moons ago, and so I parlayed that into an art career in advertising and in product design and marketing, and if for those who weren't on the first session, I actually do a lot of work in the toy and game space, both board game and video game space. So I do a lot of character design and environmental design and product design for that product class, that sort of toy and game and entertainment field. So what I could do is, because obviously a picture's worth 1,000 words, might be easier for me to do a screen share, and then I could kind of show you guys some of my art, and then we can talk more specifically about the topic of character design, because I think that's really fascinating, particularly for a lot of kind of up and coming artists. They really want to know about character design, because obviously form is the function. I'm going to start with some slideshow images. I've shown some of these last week, and I wanted to show a few more because I've done quite a bit of character art over the years, and a lot of stuff like this with these little play sets and little character designs, little mashup of Marvel characters for this play set that I did for Hasbro a couple of years ago. Lots of elements like this, where this was for a comic, this is for the San Diego Comic-Con a couple of years ago, where they asked me to do art for a display. This is it at the event. I do a lot of character design as it relates to original characters as well, not just licensed characters, although primarily, guys, my artwork is licensed characters. It is like Spider-Man and Darth Vader and things like that. However, every now and then I'll get commissioned from a client to create original characters from scratch. And this is for a game called Spiky Dastards, I think it's called. And so they had me create these characters from scratch. And this is sort of the preliminary model of the character based on my sketches. I think it's based on this little guy. So you can kind of see, this is how the form of the character essentially morphs and evolves into actual structure. And this is some product art. This was actually for the packaging art. All right. And as you can see, again, lots of artwork that is for, what do you want to call it? For commercial purposes, for licensing purposes. You know, these are those minion characters I'm sure people who have children are familiar with. I showed that one last week. It's video game stuff. Again, characters that are pre-existing. So I did all these guys for this cover art. And then I have a series of sort of like, here we go. Big old battle royale of all these guys. Which, by the way, again, form being structure is a big part of it. And then again, back to the character designs. So a lot of it is, again, original characters. And so for an apparel line, I developed these characters for an apparel line. These sort of monsters, I call them mongers, I think is what they're called, this product line. And so a lot of it is, let's see, I think I have a whole folder for these guys, is just using your imagination and applying it to make these kind of functional characters. Hopefully they're interesting. I hope they're a little bit interesting. Hopefully they have the right amount of dynamics. And the main thing that I'm trying to display with some of these is that hopefully there's a sense of dimensionality, if that's a real word, that these aren't just flat images on a page or flat images on a screen. There's a hint or an indication that each one of these shapes have some sort of volume. Even though these are all imaginary little cartoon characters, hopefully they portray themselves as characters that have some sort of depth. Maybe you can't quite reach out and touch them, but they have sort of a level of shading. And I do a lot with line art and sort of line art quality and line weight to kind of trick the eye into thinking things have more depth than they do. But hopefully you can kind of see that. So it's for me, it's the most effective way as a character design artist to capture life, to bring life to a lot of these characters. You know, and a lot of that is in the form and in the shape of the structures. All right, hopefully everyone is, I said I wouldn't say it, but hopefully everybody's seeing this stuff okay. Yes, thumbs up, awesome. All right, so I don't know if you guys are aware, I kind of mentioned it in the chat. I have an Instagram, and I actually have a YouTube channel as well. It's called Sketchy Goichi. That's what that says, believe it or not. It's not 60. Some people look at it and they see 60, but that's a G. It's Sketchy Goichi. And on that, so for the last couple of years on YouTube, I was doing these, how do I describe it? Sort of kind of like what I'm doing with you guys in this session, where I kind of take my philosophy and my takes on how to render. And I did basically videos for free for about 2 years of basically how I render and how I could help artists who are trying to kind of figure out all the tips, trying to share my tips and tricks to how to kind of achieve a solid render. And so again, shape and form, everything, if you guys notice these sketches, and you're gonna see them kind of being taken to finished, they all start with these sort of like construction drawings, right? Very loose, very scratchy, but that's how you capture the form. It's like how I try to imagine every single character I render, even these sort of like these cartoony ones, it's like they all have depth and dimension. And a lot of that is captured in sort of those sort of loose sketches. Like you can kind of see here, it's just me kind of like noodling around the page. And I know all you fellow artists probably do this as well. This is probably pretty obvious, but I find that a lot of newer artists or artists still trying to figure it out, they don't take into account the volume, the shapes that are underneath or perceived underneath what is the line art. They just naturally assume, they just lay the pen down and just hope that you can capture dimensionality just by going around the outer edge, the contour lines. And for me, I like to try to, wherever possible, and you can kind of see it indicated in the shading, is to try to represent like a light source. That I think is one of the more effective ways to provide volume or to give shape to some of these characters, right? Even something like this, that's just a straight on front view. A lot of this, again, there's the form in it. If you notice like the construction lines, even something as simple as just that line that runs down the center that kind of bisects the character, that allows me to have like an anchor point. And then you're gonna notice something really interesting about this. And by the way, guys, I should mention that a lot of the artwork I render is digital. So a lot of the tricks, I don't know if you saw that happen just now. I literally rendered only half of that character and then flipped it and created the other side. And actually, yeah, I'll go back. Right? I don't know. I don't mind sharing some sort of inside, some behind the scenes insider trading. But again, once I have the form and the structure of the character down, for me, the render part is almost like icing on the cake, because I have all the guidance I need to be able to render the line as cleanly as I need to be able to flip it like I just did there, and to match it up so it looks more than just symmetrical. It looks like it's the actual other side of the character. And then all the detailing in the white and adding in the shadows and the highlights is just to further emphasize the form of it. Of course, you got to throw some background down there to make it a little more interesting. And then hopefully you can see, again, everything is rooted in that underdrawing, that concept sketch that goes in there before you really want to start laying in the details. Oh, that's my daughter's drawing in there. She hijacked it. She hijacked my file from in there. I think she was like 4 or 5 when she did it too. Which, by the way, my daughter, she should be conducting these this little webinar, because she's awesome. She can draw her tail off. So anyway, so I got a whole host of these. And so I want to share this one in particular. In fact, if it'll let me pause, I'm not sure it will. Yeah. I wanted you guys to note this up in the corner. I was drawing like sort of my own sort of cartoon version of these Thundercat characters, which again, awesome character design, Lionel, Mumra, I can't remember the name of the cat character, Schnarf, I think his name is. Anyways, awesome character design. And I was gonna do my own little kind of version for one of the videos on YouTube. And every time I wanna render something that is of licensed art, I always pull one of these guys. They essentially, in the advertising world, we call these mood boards, which basically all it is, guys, is just, I just go on Google and I Google image search the characters and I just create like this little collection of images and I keep it kind of off to the side so that when I'm rendering my character, I can capture the costume details and sort of the form language that the original artists or creators that they wanted to capture. And that's what I will help you identify, even though this is a weird sort of stocky version of him, because I have the reference handy, I can actually sort of capture that and I can capture the forms based off of having it handy. So it's just a little tip that I recommend for artists. So let me resume. So my goal here, again, working digitally is as you can see, I can kind of like on separate layers, I can mix and match and kind of piecemeal it and kind of to make it into the final piece of art. But again, having that underdrawing, you can kind of see it come back. The underdrawing kind of comes back when I sort of blank that layer out, or should I say reveal that layer underneath to see the underdrawing. Same thing for this little guy here. In some cases, I actually, as a stylistic choice, I actually leave some of those construction lines, those little scratchy, edgy lines. Sometimes I leave them on there. In some cases, actually, guys, I even add some just for flavor to add a little more dynamic quality to them. But as you can see here, it's just literally simply a matter of taking that construction line and just adding some depth, some shading, and some line art to bring them to life, right? Same rules apply here for all of these. And this is a slightly more complicated scene where you have multiple characters kind of interacting, some in the foreground, some in the back. I can see there's like a little Iron Man. I don't know if you can see it like in Thanos' armpit, there's a little Iron Man flying in from the back, kind of shooting him in the back. And all the little Guardians of the Galaxy kind of battling with him. I probably did this right around the time of Marvel's Infinity War, Avengers Infinity War. So it's right around, so this is a couple years old. Actually, there's even a little Doc Strange in there in the background. But again, all of it is rooted in having that underdrawing. Even something like this little wacky zombie character. Again, all these little shapes inform it, all right? So if we get the gist of that. So as we can see here, we have like 4 really clearly identifiable characters. Incredible, simple character design, identifiable at a distance. Like, and guys, trust me, to create this Wreck-It Ralph character, there's probably 100 drawings or 200 drawings or maybe more it took for them to finally land on this character and all the proportions and all the shapes and how big his fists are and how little his feet are and how squared off the shapes are. Like even his hair, all of this stuff went through, I don't know how many iterations to finally land on that version, right? And I think what happens is same thing with Thor. I mean, I'm sure back in the day when Thor was created for the comic books, this is obviously a more updated version. But again, I'm sure Jack Kirby or whoever created him, I'm sure it was Jack Kirby back in the day, actually sort of, there was a couple of iterations before he landed on that version, or even Link from Legend of Zelda. Again, there's certain form factors that make these characters super identifiable, right? And this is one of the main things I wanted to kind of tap, and I'm going to render right on top if you don't mind. I'm going to take the Wreck-It Ralph character, right? So I'm going to render right on top of him. Here's one of the things that I think a lot of kind of new artists or artists who aren't really aware of this, they kind of take for granted. In fact, let me diminish the, so you can kind of see what I'm trying to do here. All right, so let's take this Wreck-It Ralph, right? A lot of times I think people will take this character and if they wanted to do a version of him, they would just kind of draw the outer outline of the character, right? And although that is, I mean, it's good, you can kind of get a version of the character. I'll just do his face, right? What it lacks is what is actually going on with the anatomy of this guy. Right? It's flat. There's no sort of sense of like any sort of shape. Even if I put some more detail in. Hold on. Let me put a little more detail in. I'll even kind of like just the hairline. In fact, I'll even do his little eyes, nose, smile, eyebrows, whatever. You guys get the gist, right? It's still flat, right? You kind of see that, right? And how many times have we seen art that is like that? And we actually, I'm a victim of it. I mean, when I was first learning how to draw, I just thought the coolest part was the outline, the shape, or in some cases, like just sort of like, even I would get enamored with the thick and thinness of the line weight and all that. And I wouldn't take into account that this character has shape and dimension, right? So we'll take that same image and maybe I'll do it in a different color. But what we really should be taking into account is what is actually going on behind the scenes in this character, right? Like his skull probably ends somewhere around there, right? We know his little jawline, or not so little jawline, right? We know his nose is about there. We know his mouth is about there. We know his eyes are about there, and his eyebrows are there, right? Just by doing that, I've already sort of started to capture the dimensionality. Like this shape is almost like a peanut shape. And I'm kind of doing like this little sort of wireframe for you guys to kind of get an understanding. Like every character you render has planes. Like, and by that I mean, it's not, by that, I don't mean JetBlue or Southwest. By planes, I mean like everything that there's sort of like these shapes have a path or a volume. They have a certain amount of volume. Same thing even with his hair. In fact, I'll do that in a different color too, just to kind of emphasize it greater. Even these cool shapes that are his head, his hair, they also have dimensionality too. You almost have to imagine them as not these individual strands of hair, more like these sort of like these almost like these cutout shapes that are representative of hair. And I think that's one of the major flaws with when people render characters, particularly hair. Oftentimes they lose sight that hair is not individual strands when it's rendered graphically. I should be very clear about that. Obviously, if you're doing this more traditional, like oil paint or acrylics or something, you can obviously there's a path to which you can just like apply a single brush stroke to capture. All right, so let me take this off. Are you guys starting to see that there's more going on underneath the character? And if you can recognize that in every single character that you render, it actually will help to inform, or should I say, almost actually, the better way to describe it is it sort of tricks the eye, speaking of eyes, it tricks the eyes into thinking that that this has actual volume. This actually is something that is dimensional, and of course, the actual Wreck-It Ralph illustration is, let's be real, let's be honest. Well, first things first, hopefully you can see that this take on it is not necessarily the right way to go. And you can see that if you can kind of discipline yourself to kind of see that everything has volume, every single strand of hair, every single like wisp of an eyebrow, all of this stuff, you can kind of see it even further detail in his face. So I'll go back to my little render here. There are more planes going on in the face. Well, not that. And that can be evidenced get back to this red color. Like you can see where his cheeks, let me check them on the right level. Where his cheeks go. You see where the eyes end. There's like a little lid section there as well. And you can see all that if you choose to think of seeing it. Everything is like that underneath, right? And here's another way to describe it too. Oftentimes, guys, like I'll render like a really, really simple character. In fact, from last week's, I'll start with a circle. So this is going to be a cute character, right? From last week, all right? I'm going to do big old cute eyes, right? Do a little nose. I love to do. Maybe he's not so cute. Maybe he's a little wonky, right? And I'll give him a little body. Forgive me. Body. Little feet, right? And matter of fact, we'll give him some Wreck-It Ralph hair. How about that? All right. Again, I don't know how cute this character is. Not very cute, but anyway, so there's our little guy, right? And yeah, that looks okay. But the reality is, if I would, this is how I think about it. And this is what I recommend for every other artist or anyone else who cares to note this, is like oftentimes when I think of this character, I see this character. Matter of fact, let me just diminish this a bit. I see this guy, like, forgive the crudeness of it, I see what's going on underneath. Like I see like a skeletal structure underneath, right? I know it sounds weird, but like whenever I'm rendering these guys, like little ribs, little hip bone, right? This is, believe it or not, this is how I see every character. I see them all like having some sort of understructure, right? I don't know if it makes sense. I hope you guys can see this okay, but that's how I see every single character. And when you start seeing characters and then knowing that there's a bone structure underneath that, let me diminish this down a bit or way a lot, then I know that obviously then there's like applied on top of that is likely muscle or some sort of flesh that goes on top of it. And that's where this stuff starts coming into play. Like that, literally this stuff goes on top of that skeletal structure. And what that allows me to do is like that form allows me to distort it if I needed to. So for example, if I take that same character and I wanted to put them on a different plane, and again, I'm not talking Delta or American Airlines, but I want to change the camera angle of this character, right? I know that this is not a circle. This is a sphere, right? I know it. So that allows me to kind of be able to basically place the body in that sphere, in that shape, in dimension, because I can think of it and see it in dimension. And so I know now that, like, you know, again, this is that same character. And he's going to have that wild hair. But I can alter him because I see him in dimensions. Hopefully that makes sense, guys. All right, same guy, but he's got form and structure. Cool? Thumbs up, yes? All right, cool. So anyway, so that is kind of the gist of form and structure. And the last part of it, hopefully I'm not running too long, but the last part of it is seeing the silhouette of a character. This to me is the biggest part of what makes good character design great character design. I'm gonna use Mr. Incredible for this one. Actually, no, I'm gonna use Link for this one, right? What makes him so good is his silhouette is strong. by that, I mean, if I were to take, I'll do this real quick. I'm gonna take this character and I'm gonna just do a quick sort of trace over of his shape, including the shield and the sword. And by the way, this is a good exercise if anybody wants to kind of do this, just to kind of get a feel for what makes a quality character or something really identifiable as a character, and something that is really like, for some way you want to try to determine what makes it so appealing. This is one of the steps that I would take to figure it out, because what makes a lot of these characters work so well is because the form language is really well thought out and the proportions are really well thought out, and they work in silhouette, as you'll see in a second. Just get around the horn here. And quickly I'll render that. Forgive the crudeness of this, guys. Yeah, hopefully this will be evidence. That'd be funny if I ran around and did all that and it didn't work out, but it's going on. I'm gonna stay positive. All right, so there's our link. Let's see if it fills. And of course it's something open. Let me do one thing really quick. Oh, there it is. Found the hole right there. I think that's it. And there. Oh, maybe I didn't. Oh, there's another hole. Sorry, guys. By the way, when I'm working in Procreate, that's the app I'm working on right now for those who are unaware. Oh, there's another opening. And whenever you can do an outline like that and automatically fill it in Procreate, which again, another reason I love to work digitally, for the shortcuts I can or cheats, as some might call it. All right, that I think should do it. There it is. There's the silhouette. Got it. That character works. Like right there, I know just by looking at that silhouette, that's Link from Legend of Zelda. Because the designer did such a great job of taking into account all the little elements that make this character work. And what makes this character work is like this sort of swoop, the swoosh of the hair in the front. Let's pick a different color. This area here, the way the hat sort of tails off to the side, the spiky sort of like elf-like ears, which I'm assuming like is this little like these, I don't know if they're sideburns. I don't know what to call those guys. The shape of his face and the way his costume fits him. Like all these elements, like the belt, even the belt in the middle, all this stuff is designed to the nth degree. Trust me, I've sat in on these sessions where where we render this stuff over and over again. And just to capture, dozens and dozens of sketches just to kind of capture the one that works the best. But it's all the spatial relationships, all the forms, like all the stuff that like the way the boots are, and the size of the feet in relation to the legs, in relation to the upper body. All the stuff is taken into account, and all of it goes to serve the character. And actually, believe it or not, is actually part of the character storytelling. Like there's something about like this sort of amulet this character is wearing. I'm sure there's something about this specific sword, right? And by the way, this little study that I used to do this all the time, but back when it was like pen and paper. I used to take a sheet of tracing paper and just kind of like work out the forms and structures of these characters, right? So by the way, this is just a little contour drawing. I'm not sure if this will have the same effect as the, yeah, hopefully it does. Like, hopefully you guys can see that okay, but even this little contour drawing, that's Link. Because the form language is so well done by the original artist. So just bear that in mind. Oh, look at a little combo. Here we'll get a little combo platter right there. A little line work and character there. But anyway, so that is the form. That's how you get to the structure. It's a lot of sketches. It's a lot of decisions in terms of what to emphasize and what not to. And in the end, to get to really good character form and design, it's seeing what's going on underneath these characters. It's seeing and recognizing and making part of your workflow, like what is actually the structure of things underneath. Cool.
That's
there you go.
Awesome. Thank you.
That's what I got for you guys.
So at this time, so we'll open it up for questions.
Can I respond to the chat? Because I got it up in front of me.
Yeah,
Pinterest.
Absolutely. Go for it.
That's a great suggestion. Whoever put that in there, like Pinterest is an awesome place, a source for images to use as reference. I mean, that's such a great place to kind of start. Not to plagiarize, not to use the original art, but to use as reference. And I find, like, I've seen some of the biggest advancements in artists when they take like photographs of actual, like, of, real human anatomy. And I just saw somebody ask about Procreate. Oh, Procreate is an app for the iPad. And that's what I was rendering in. I was rendering in Procreate. It's essentially it's a drawing app, for lack of a better way to describe it. But you can draw, paint, sketch. You can do just about, in fact, I think there's even a 3D element to it now. You can do little 3D rendered images now on it too. So it's a really awesome program, very robust. And then you use the Apple Pencil that comes with the iPad, that you get an extra along with the iPad they work in conjunction to kind of make them, to make it basically this is my whole art studio is literally what I'm talking to you guys on right now is my art studio and video presentation place and everything is all in this iPad. But anyways, yeah, so Pinterest, Google Image, but it doesn't matter. I like the idea of using an actual human with human proportions. If you choose to render in that fashion, if you like to render in more realistic proportions, I take that exercise I did with that Wreck-It Ralph with the head, the way I did that sort of wireframe. If you take a full-bodied image of a human being, whether they're standing, seated, in an action pose, and you go in and you do that sort of that technique where you render on top, and you, even if it's with actual tracing paper on a magazine or a photograph or on the computer or on the iPad, you throw a layer on top and just render on top. And that's what's going to allow you to have a real true sense of the form and structure of things. And once you have that sense, you're unstoppable. You can render anything from any angle, as I try to demonstrate.
Paula said, is there a non-iPad version?
No, not that I'm aware of. Honestly, I think Procreate is dedicated only to the iPad. That being said, there are probably hundreds of other drawing apps, for the Android marketplace or wherever else. Like you can find other. I mean, I used to draw in Photoshop, and Photoshop is universal. That's on every machine in the world. But I'd rather not. In fact, my workflow for many, many years was I used to have this giant scanner. I don't know if anybody remembers the scanners before iPhones, before we could just take a photo of something and scan it. I used to have this giant scanner and I would render everything, believe it or not, everything I would render was on tracing paper and with red felt tip pen. Like everything I would draw. And then what I would do is I would take that, I would scan it in to Photoshop and I would turn the line art black in Photoshop. It was the strangest technique, but it worked for me. And then I would, while the artwork is in Photoshop, then I would do my digital coloring. But I used to work like that for years and years and years.
I have a comment from Daisy saying, I don't have a question, but I wanted to say that when creating a character, I often forget that they have volume. So they always come out as kind of stiff. I found really useful hearing that part today.
Oh, awesome. Now that's why, guys, if you ever see art or you've rendered something that doesn't feel like it has the resonant amount of life to it, and it feels stiff or it feels flat, it's oftentimes because you haven't taken into account the volume of it. And you're not seeing it as I don't care. You can take the simplest cartoon character. Like that's what I try to demonstrate with a little circular character. But if you see that character as a sphere with a little cylinder that comes off him with some cones that come off of that to make his little arms and some little shapes for his feet. If you start seeing that, then it's also going to aid further down the road when you either line art or you turn it into a dimensional image, like with shading and highlights, because you'll start seeing it as something that has dimension. But yeah, that's why though. If you ever see something that's stiff and it feels lifeless, it's because of that. Or you've delivered something that is stiff and lifeless, it's because you haven't taken into account like what's going on underneath.
And I have another question from Autumn. What would you say inspires you to design characters? How did you get to design for companies like Hasbro? Your work is amazing and I'm so inspired. Thank you for this groovy presentation. It's so cool that the rules of art still apply to character design. I never thought of it that way.
Awesome. Well, thank you. I'm inspired by, I've been drawing these comic booky, cartoony characters my entire life. We're talking like literally like 40 something straight years of drawing these characters. So I'm constantly inspired by that. Like that well, for some reason, doesn't seem to ever run dry of inspiration and that sort of pop culture genre characters. So I'm constantly fulfilled. I'm constantly able to sort of draw on all the stuff that I used to watch and absorb, cartoons and books and media my entire life. And so instantaneously I'm inspired by that. But what really inspires me when I go on Instagram, and that's why I can't wait to look at some of your Instagrams after this, is seeing other people's art and other people's approaches to how they render characters, specifically character designs. Because there's so many different ways to skin a cat. Like literally, if we just rendered a skinned cat, like, all of us on the call, we'd all render it differently. And so like, I'm fascinated by that. And I like the idea that we all have our own unique take on things. And so when I see someone's version of it and they're like, oh, I never would have thought to add whiskers there, or I never would have thought to put that tuft of hair down the center. And like, and I love that, to see how other people's creativity flows. And so I use that as like the new rejuvenating source of inspiration in terms of creating characters.
Part 2 of that question was, how did you get to design for companies like Hasbro?
All right, so the story with Hasbro is, I think I touched on this last week, is I actually, when I graduated from art school, I got a job in advertising in Boston. And I decided to go freelance. So I was working in-house. I had a job. I was set, right? JOB. I had my W-2. I had my taxes were paid, my health insurance, everything. I was good. I was drawing for a living. I was all set. Until I realized what would happen, guys, is like other artists would come in to kind of help us if we were doing like a pitch for a new business for the advertising agency. And they would bring in other artists, freelance artists, to come in and work with us to kind of augment it, because it was so much work. It's just myself and my fellow artist, Steve, we couldn't handle it all. And so they would come in at like noon. They'd work till like, 7, 8 o'clock at night. They would eat the same catered food that we would eat. And then they would go home and they would submit their invoice, and they were getting paid like literally 3 times what I was making. And so I had a little light bulb moment at that point. I was like, you know what? Perhaps I think I'm able to do what they do. All I have to do is have the courage to kind of strike out on my own and basically become an entrepreneur and do this character design, all this stuff for myself. So I went out and started marketing myself. And right around that time, my alma mater, the art school that I graduated from, invited me back to come teach. So I'm only 6 years out of school, and they brought me back to come teach. So I taught for a couple of years. And one of the students I taught was this outstanding artist. His name's Chris Ford. In fact, he owns his own design firm in Boston, design and branding firm. And he got a job at Hasbro out of school. And he remembered me, and he remembered that I like to draw characters and do all that stuff. And so he brought me into Hasbro to do freelance work. And from that, it's history. It's a wrap from that point on. Once I was in, that was it. Once I'm in, that's it. I'm in. Because the thing about being an artist, one thing I noticed, it's not necessarily like getting your foot in the door. That's a challenge. That's a challenge for any artist. But like, how do you maintain? How do you keep your foot in the door? Like, how do you get clients that are loyal to you? And what I've noticed is be reliable. One thing I can say is like, I don't want to toot my own horn, but one thing I am is like, I deliver. There's not a client that I've had over the last 20 something years I've been doing this that I deliver every time. But I may complain a little bit, but that's under my breath and to myself, but I deliver for them. Deadlines, I never miss a deadline, right? If they want me to do an extra version, like if they took those little characters I was rendering on the presentation, and they said, no, we want to see that character with an afro, I'll draw that. Oh, we want to see that character with glasses, I'll draw that. We want to see that character wearing a Scottish kilt, I'll draw that. Doesn't matter, you know, like I serve the client. I feel like, I think a lot of artists get bogged down in thinking like, well, it's my art, it's my world. And it is to a degree, but when you're a commercial artist, right, you serve the client, you're a storyteller, you're part of the machine. And I don't mind that. And the machine actually pays very well if you do right by them. And so I've been very fortunate over the years to have a pretty good career at doing this, and I get continued work. In fact, I've got work waiting for me when I get off the call. And it's only simply because I deliver. And I think that's the main thing. I'd be prepared to be someone who delivers before you ever get that consistent amount of work.
I have actually a few more coming up. So from Marian, do you like to use the base shape language of squares, circles, and triangles when designing your character?
Absolutely. Yep. To piggyback on what from last week's, like, those are the basis for everything. It's, you know, it's rectangles. Well, actually, it's not even rectangles, to be honest with you guys, based off of this, like this, you know, the second part of the presentation. It's about spheres. It's about cylinders. It's about, you know, it's about like boxes, elongated boxes. Like, I use a series of those shapes in my mind, and even when I'm rendering, those are what I use as my form language. Those shapes with dimension. I can imagine them with dimension, with shadow, with a dark side, a light side. You know, I imagine them when I'm rendering. Even the most rudimentary thumbnail sketch, I kind of imagine the form. And so if you can get in the habit of doing that, everything will have a little bit of life to it, because there's more than just one, there's a presumed other dimension beyond just that simple line that you meticulously put on the page.
Another question from Paula. How long did it take you to go from hand drawing to computer rendering?
I mean, it's literally like, I spent my entire life hand drawing all the way up until maybe like 2004. Say somewhere in that range, maybe a little after that, maybe 2007. And whatever year the iPad came out, I don't know if it's 07 or 2010 or whenever that came out, as soon as I bought the iPad, I knew at that moment, like, it was going to be my main medium. It was no longer going to be magic marker and pen and ink and pencil on paper. I just knew it. Not that I mean, if pressed, if you hand me a sheet of paper and a pencil, I can render something for you. Like, that doesn't go away. But what I love about working digitally, and specifically on the iPad with the Apple Pencil, it allows you to replicate what it's like to render in the real world. It's not one-to-one. It's not dipping a brush or mixing paint and then applying it to a canvas. It's not that. It'll never be that. But I can replicate it pretty darn close using Procreate as my app, and the iPad and the Apple Pencil as my chosen weapons of choice. So, so the transition, again, as soon as it came out, as soon as I started using it, no more scanner, no more tracing paper, no more felt tip pen. Because think about it, for me, because I work professionally, there's a level of efficiency that I have to work within. Because I have a deadline. Every assignment I have has a deadline. So I have parameters. So I have to find the most efficient way to deliver the best possible product for my client. And so the iPad became like, it eliminated having to scan anything. If I ever needed to change or edit anything, I could do it instantaneously. Or I can create a new document based off of that one, duplicate it, and then start from scratch on top of that old document and start a whole new rendering right on top. And so it was a game changer for me and like literally a million other artists.
I have a comment from Autumn. Thank you so much. Your perspective on art and life is amazingly cool. I'm grateful for this opportunity. And then I also have Paula saying, did you use the same style, or did you really change the way you draw in terms of the iPad change?
No, in fact, I think I think the style was so baked in, right? There's like a decade and a half or so of just pure muscle memory of how I choose to render. That being said, I mean, what the iPad has allowed me to do is have versatility within the same file, meaning I could render a character, so you saw that really loose and sketchy on one layer, create another layer on top, then ink it really tightly and finely, and then create another layer in between that has all the colors and all that stuff. And then another layer on top of that that has highlight and shadow. Like of course you can build up, like if you're working in watercolor or acrylics, you can build it up. You know, you can work light and sort of watery and kind of build it to be more opaque. But because I'm working digitally, all of that stuff is instantaneous in my access to it. And I've customized the app in such a way, and my brushes in such a way that it's tailor-made to how I actually render. So my style always comes through, you know? So I've actually tailor-made brushes within the app to allow, like when my hand moves across the screen, it also, it replicates how it would have if I was using an ink pen on paper.
Apollo says, do you create games?
To be honest with you, create games in terms of from scratch, very seldom. Like there was a point in time where like I'll create characters for games, meaning like oftentimes the video game company already has it, they have concepts baked in, and then they'll bring me in and I'll see stuff at the writing stage, and they'll have me develop characters. Like literally, like just like we did today, I'll take a blank screen and just start scratching out. So if they'll say like, we want an elf warrior character who has to find a princess, you know, and they'll give me a bunch of detail in terms of like how they see the character. And then I'll render versions of that, and they will select which ones to take further from there. So that oftentimes happens where like the pure character design, like coming up with stuff based off of a writer's idea.
One more question. Do you think being from New Bedford has played a role in your career path?
Well, it made me hungry, right? I mean, I was never hungry growing up. I'm Cape Verdean, so my grandmother always had me fed, but that's no doubt. I mean, I was never hungry, but in terms of like, I mean, anyone from New Bedford, I mean, there is a grittiness to New Bedford. There's a sort of like, it's not dog eat dog like New York or Boston, but there is sort of like you've got to persevere in New Bedford. And in order to succeed, it feels like you have to kind of break the earth's gravity to persevere coming from New Bedford. And so I've always had that mentality. Like if you really want to succeed, you got to go for it. You can't, there's no excuses, right? Nobody's taking any excuses in New Bedford. I'm not trying to hear it. And so I've had that, you know, and I had awesome, my grandparents were phenomenal growing up, very supportive. And so I always had, I had a good platform coming from New Bedford, you know, and again, I graduated from New Bedford Voc, and I'm on the New Bedford Voc Advisory Board Committee. And so I'd like to kind of shout them out too, because like that education coming from Voc was literally put me on this path. Like, you know, that education, that instruction I got back then is what allowed me to kind of gave me focus, and it allowed me to kind of push towards this, what I do now for a living.
I want to thank you all for your time this afternoon. This was a great session. I'd also like to thank Roger once again for all his hard work. So have a great day, everyone, and thank you again for your participation.